So I'm going to give you guys a brief description of how blood pressure is regulated by the kidneys. So as we've talked about, blood pressure is that force that is acting on the walls of the arteries. When that blood is being pumped out of the heart, we can actually measure blood pressure using a blood pressure cuff or a sphygmomanometer and a stethoscope. We can hear that blood rushing through the arteries, and we can actually take the pulse pressures. And all of that is dependent upon what the kidneys do to regulate blood pressure. So we're going to talk about how that happens. So first of all, if we think of our anatomy of the kidney, we have to remember the glomerulus as well as the afferent and efferent arterioles. So if I just draw a little glomerulus within the Bowman's capsule, and if we have our arterioles, this one being the afferent and this one being the efferent, we're going to focus in on the afferent arteriole. So this arteriole right here. Within the walls of the afferent arteriole are these very specialized cells. They're actually called baroreceptors. They are a type of mechanoreceptor that try to understand and send impulses regarding pressure. These specialized cells within the afferent arteriole are going to monitor and continuously monitor how much pressure is being pressed against them. When that pressure becomes too low, when blood pressure becomes too low, these little specialized cells are going to secrete an enzyme called renin. Okay, renin is an enzyme. Again, remember, an enzyme is a very specialized protein. So renin will be secreted by these specialized cells of the afferent arteriole. Now, what does renin do? Well, renin triggers a multiple step process. Before we can understand it, we have to understand what the liver is also doing at this time. So the liver is secreting a protein, an inactive protein called angiotensinogen. Angiotensinogen is constantly being produced by the liver. It is inactive and flowing through our bloodstream all the time. It's inactive until this renin is secreted by the afferent arteriole, and when this renin acts on the angiotensinogen, something happens. Angiotensinogen is transformed into what is called angiotensin type 1. Angiotensin type 1 is essentially this angiotensinogen with a few amino acids dropped off, making it a smaller protein called a peptide. Angiotensin type 1 can't quite do anything for blood pressure yet, but it has started the process. When angiotensin type 1 makes its way through the bloodstream to the lungs specifically, it is acted on by a different enzyme, by the ACE enzyme called the angiotensin converting enzyme, okay, ACE for short, angiotensin converting enzyme, acts upon angiotensin type 1 and converts it into angiotensin type 2. Okay, now angiotensin type 2 is very active. Angiotensin type 2 will help me to increase my blood pressure. Now, it does so via two different things. So first of all, let's come up here. Angiotensin type 2 is going to act on my blood vessels. So the walls of my arteries are actually going to what's called vasoconstrict. They're going to become tighter. They're going to be less dilated. They're going to instead be more constricted. So vasoconstriction happens. That vasoconstriction will increase slightly my blood pressure because it's putting more pressure on the blood running through my arteries, putting more pressure on those arterial walls because it is a smaller volume than it was previously. So vasoconstriction happens. The next thing that also happens has to do with the endocrine system. So angiotensin type 2 stimulates the secretion of aldosterone. Aldosterone comes from the adrenal glands. Okay, we learned about these in the endocrine system. Aldosterone comes from the adrenal gland. It's secreted and it goes and acts on the nephron of the kidney. It stimulates the nephron to absorb more sodium. Okay, salt, sodium. That absorption of sodium in turn is going to attract water to the bloodstream. So it is going to, aldosterone is going to act on the nephron to take in that sodium, that salt. Water is going to follow that salt back into the bloodstream. More water into the blood is going to increase the volume of our blood, making it so that there is more blood pressure. The more volume, the more pressure there is. So that in a nutshell is how the kidney acts on our blood pressure.